right now, Meghan Markle, we talked about her yesterday, and I mentioned her. We mentioned her earlier. She's got this podcast, $25 million she get paid from Spotify to do this podcast. And so her first podcast was Serena Williams, where Meghan talked about what a victim she's been her whole life. She's a princess, but she's a victim. Second episode is with Mariah Carey, and Mariah Carey actually in a great moment, Spencer, kind of turned the tables on Meghan and called her a diva, which she is.
Really?
And let me bring it to you what happened. But I just feel like this is all hashtag part of the problem. Meghan Markle, hashtag part of the problem. Here's soundbite 1 in which Mariah turns the table.
And I think that's really important for people to remember that there might be this persona. And yes, the diva thing we can play into. I mean, it's not something that I connect to, but if for you, it's been a huge part of your...
give us diva moments sometimes, Megyn.
What kind of diva moments do I give you?
Don't act like you. It's also the visual. It's the visual. A lot of it's the visual. Because
see, that's the thing. I associate it differently.
Well, I know, but let's pretend that you weren't so beautiful and didn't have the whole thing and didn't often have gorgeous ensembles. You wouldn't get as much diva stuff. I don't care. I'm like, when I can, I'm going to give you diva.
Okay. That was during the exchange, because Meghan's whole thing on this podcast to make it about herself. And then she comes back in her own closing remarks on her own podcast, Meghan Markle, having mused about the diva assertion, and says the following.
It was all going swimmingly. I mean, really well. Until that moment happened, which I don't know about you, but it stopped me in my tracks. When she called me a diva. You couldn't see me, obviously, but I started to sweat a little bit. I started squirming in my chair in this quiet revolt. Like, wait, what? No, what? Huh? But how could you? That's not true. Why would you say that? My mind genuinely was just spinning with what nonsense she must have read or clicked on to make her say that. And I just kept thinking in that moment, was my girl crush coming to a quick demise? Does she actually not see me? So she must have felt my nervous laughter, and you all would have heard it too. And she jumped right in to make sure I was crystal clear. When she said diva, she was talking about the way that I dress, the posture, the clothing, the quote unquote fabulousness as she sees it.
Oh my God, Spencer. I'm gagging on the narcissism. Yesterday, she compared herself to Nelson Mandela. And now today, we have to deal with this. She can't understand why anybody would think she's a diva. I mean, let me count the ways. As, you know, during the Queen's Jubilee, she's making sure to put the window down so everyone can get her photograph, right? As she's always got to be wearing Princess Diana's jewelry, as she's got to have just the right angle and photographer, and she'll only deal with this certain stenographer, press guy, Scobie, whatever his name is. She won't deal. She sues every magazine who writes something negative about her. She pulls the meanest comment about herself, tries to blow it up into what a victim she's been because she's only used to the good things being said about her. I mean, the fact that she didn't want to live in the royal cottage and the Frogmore, it wasn't good enough for her. They had to redo it on the taxpayer dime. She didn't pay. All of it. I could keep going. And now to be like, the indignation.
You told me.
Thank God it was just about my appearance. Yeah, thank God. That I understand. Look at me.
This is the act of a person who would sit in Windsor Castle with Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, a woman who once broke bread with Winston Churchill, and complain about her mental health. I mean, it's like, it's not a day spa. It's one of the most ancient monarchies in Europe. Like, I mean, look, you know, I will say this. When John Adams, when Abigail Adams died, and John Adams was survived her, and when people would compliment him on the success of his son, John Quincy, he reportedly had something that he would always say in response. People would say, "Oh, your son is so great. You must be so proud." And he would say, "My son had a mother." And when I first read that, I actually teared up a little bit. I mean, we've talked on this show about my dad and the close relationship that I have with him. And, you know, I like to joke, but it's not really a joke. Like, my mom is the best Klavan. She's like Klavan Deluxe, and she's the only one of us who never does any media. So you all just have to take my word for it. But when I hear people talking about womanhood in these ways, or offering these, role models to young girls, telling them they have to be like Meghan Markle or like Lizzo. I always think, I too had a mother, and it incenses me on those terms, just to, my mom stayed home with us. She had a thriving career on either side of that. She was a successful writer before we were born. She continued to write a little bit, but basically stayed home. And then, when we were grown, she took up her career, and you talked very eloquently about the kind of, you can have it all mentality, this narrative that you can do it all at once. And I've seen that too. I think there's still a little bit of it going around, but the irony is, of course, that if you'll just let go of these, confected narratives, these absolutely artificial narratives that were not designed by people who have your best interests at heart, that were not cooked up so that you could thrive and flourish, but so that somebody else could make money off of you. Just let go of that. You actually can have an entire rich, full life as a woman who, raises children and has a career. That's a very real thing. It's just not in any way, it doesn't look anything like this confection that they're serving you. And that's why it, gets me, is to think about my own mother, whom I do rise up and call blessed, as in Proverbs, and to kind of, I feel sorrowful for the girls who are being offered this just really unhelpful image.
Okay, now speaking of the FBI and the media, it's a good segue into what happened on Joe Rogan's show last week. So this is fascinating to me from a couple of angles. Mark Zuckerberg, of course, the founder and CEO of Meta, which owns Facebook, went on Joe Rogan's show and admitted that Facebook in part suppressed circulation of the Hunter Biden laptop story right before the last presidential election, that they didn't ban it entirely the way Twitter did, but that they suppressed it and wouldn't allow it to be sort of pushed into people's feeds the way they might another story. And he admitted this is because the FBI had gone to Facebook and other social media companies and said, beware, the Russians are likely at it again. They definitely pushed disinformation in 2016, and we're expecting another dump. And this is how he explained it to Joe, and then I'll make my second point. So here's what he said to Joe Rogan. Watch.
So we took a different path than Twitter. Basically the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like, you should be on high alert. There was we thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that. So just be vigilant. So our protocol is different from Twitter's. What Twitter did is they said you can't share this at all. We didn't do that. What we do is we have, if something is reported to us as potentially misinformation, important misinformation, we also have this third-party fact-checking program because we don't want to be deciding what's true and false. And for I think it was 5 or 7 days when it was basically being determined whether it was false, the distribution on Facebook was decreased, but people were still allowed to share it. So you could still share it, you could still consume it.
So when you say the distribution is decreased,
it got shared.
How does that work?
It basically, the ranking in newsfeed was a little bit less. So fewer people saw it than would have otherwise. So it definitely...
By what percentage?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's meaningful.
Okay, so people on the right were very agitated over this because he's admitting that they suppressed the Hunter Biden story after the FBI went to them. And it just, the FBI is having a rough couple of years. And this is just yet another piece of that story. But Zuckerberg and Facebook came out to say, this is old news. This wasn't news at all. Mark Zuckerberg said basically exactly this in open congressional testimony in October of 2020 to Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, which is so fun to say. I just want to say it again, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. So watch. So we queued it up to let you guys and the audience decide for themselves whether he already had disclosed this a couple of years ago. Listen.
Mr. Zuckerberg, Senator, as I testified before, we relied heavily on the FBI's intelligence and alerts to us, both through their public testimony and private briefings and alerts they gave us.
Did the FBI contact you and say the New York Post story was false?
Senator, not about that story specifically.
Why did you
but
throttle
in
it back?
general.
Why did you throttle it back?
They alerted us to be on heightened alert around a risk of hack and leak operations, around a release trove of information. And Senator, to be clear on this, we didn't censor the content. We flagged it for fact checkers to review, and pending that review, we temporarily constrained its distribution to make sure that it didn't spread wildly while it was being reviewed. But it's not up to us either to determine whether it's Russian interference nor whether it's true. We rely on the FBI and intelligence and fact checkers to do that.
Okay, so my takeaway is Mark Zuckerberg did disclose this. He disclosed it publicly in October 2020, but we were busy. And, we were having a presidential election and it didn't get a lot of circulation. With respect to Joe Rogan, I don't think he actually did break this news. I think this news broke a couple of years ago, and we were just drowning in a tsunami of presidential and Trump and related news. We didn't pay close enough attention. It's not a new black eye for the FBI. It's an old black eye for the FBI and Facebook, because now we know for sure that was not Russian disinformation, that laptop was real, that Hunter Biden did all those terrible things, according to himself, and the media just wasn't interested and they decided to suppress. Nonetheless, the story remains the same. The FBI went to social media companies like Facebook and tried to get them to not publish or not promote articles like the one about Hunter Biden. They claim to protect the electoral process and to prevent disinformation from getting out there. In the wake of all that's happened, gals, a lot of Americans have a tough time believing that was the true motivation. What do you make of it?
They laundered their credibility for partisan purposes. And I think it's also important to remember this was in the context of a letter that about 50 former intelligence people, many of whom we know should be treated with the utmost skepticism, sent a letter immediately saying that the laptop story looked like Russian disinformation. So the FBI didn't need to go back to Zuckerberg and say, hey, this laptop story specifically, you need to suppress it, because they did it in public with that letter. They had already set that sort of tone and said, watch out for Russian disinformation. And then when the laptop story dropped, all they had to do was release that thing publicly. And so it is a stunning level of coordination from all of our institutions, because the media essentially blacked out that story as well. The New York Post ran it, and all of these other outlets, major outlets that had run with nonsense leaks that in a better era would have been treated with the utmost skepticism coming from the intelligence community. We see this time and again. The media and the intelligence community have like the coziest relationship in the world. They took this stuff and they did nothing with it. And so you had coordination between the Biden campaign, the intelligence community, the entire social media, basically atmosphere, or all social media platforms. And it's like incredible to sit back and watch and look. And I think the reason, Megyn, you're right, that Joe Rogan clip is super viral right now is because it's not in the fray. It's a couple years later and people have that sort of hindsight being 2020. And when you look at it from the 30,000 foot view and see the forest for the trees, is just so anti-American. It's shocking.
It's a slower news cycle right now, so people have the attention to give to it. And it's a reminder on the heels of the Mar-a-Lago raid about the FBI and what it's done in the past. And it comes at an unfortunate moment for the FBI, but too bad. Nobody feels sorry for them. And I have real questions, Eliana, about whether the warning to social media companies back then was earnest about the Russian thing. You know what I mean? Like they can tell when a story is pushed by Russian bots. They know when it's originated with the Russians and when it hasn't. And let's not forget, the FBI had the damn laptop anyway. They knew at the time that this was being pushed as like potential disinformation, that it was Hunter's. They fucking knew. Sorry. They knew. They had gotten it from the blind guy who was repairing it. And there was nothing in there that was not consistent with Hunter's behavior or the FBI's own investigations of Hunter and the guns and the drugs and all that shit. That's the context for them going to Facebook and saying, watch it. And then, as Emily accurately points out, all these intelligence officials get together and drop the second bomb, which is we all think it's disinformation, which they didn't either. They didn't. I don't think that was in good faith either. So it's been a long campaign, in my view, of them pushing disinformation on us.
I'm with you on all of that, Megyn. And I think the icing on the cake is former intelligence officials and media personalities coming out now in the wake of the FBI's raid on Mar-a-Lago. And their line is, thou shalt not question the integrity of law enforcement officials. Merrick Garland said that in his press conference. And, my reaction is, I'm sorry, but you guys have given us a whole lot of reasons to question the integrity of law enforcement officials. And in this case, until demonstrated otherwise, I'm going to question the integrity of law enforcement officials.
Yes.
But
they're interviewing Andrew McCabe, who's admitted to lying.
And Peter Strzok.
Another thing that struck me in the side by side of those two clips, which is a little bit far afield, but I do think it's relevant to how we get our information, is it doesn't surprise me at all that everybody missed it when this came out in congressional testimony, where Ron Johnson is talking over Zuckerberg the entire time, where he's trying to make a point. Like, that is just not conducive to an exchange of information and getting information out to people. Like, no, I'm not surprised that, probably 2 people tuned into that hearing. And then Joe Rogan, a couple years later, actually lets the guy talk. And wow, the entire thing goes viral. And in all of this, I really don't blame Facebook. Facebook had spent the 4 years of the Trump administration in the crosshairs of everybody accused of purveying Russian disinformation. So yeah, when they get a warning from the FBI that says, hey, once again, you guys are in the middle of a Russian disinformation campaign, I don't blame them for what they did. I fully and wholeheartedly blame the FBI and the media for this. And it would be nice separately if in some of our congressional hearings, lawmakers spent a little bit less time talking and more time letting their, the interesting people they have in front of them, like Mark Zuckerberg, actually talk because they say interesting things.
So President Biden goes to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and this is on August 30th, and makes a speech. Of course, Pennsylvania's got some hot political races before this midterm that we're all watching, including Dr. Oz. And he makes a couple of bizarre remarks, and it kind of reminds you of why they don't let him come out, and talk too much, despite his primetime address tonight on the soul of the nation. He decides to make a comment about guns, and he's, of course, ripping on the right for being pro Second Amendment. It's right there in the Constitution. Take it up with the founders. And he says the following, which seems to mean because the people say hey, we have a right to protect ourselves from criminals and to form a militia and to prevent our government from overreaching. And here was his response.
Right now, you can't go out and buy an automatic weapon. You can't go out and buy a cannon. And for those brave right-wing Americans who say it's all about keeping America's independent and safe, if you want to fight against the country, you need an F-15. You need something a little more than a gun. No, I'm not joking. Think about this. Think about the rationale we use.
You're not?
That's used to provide this. And who are they shooting at? Shooting at these guys behind me.
So, at which point, all Republicans started to Google how to make a nuke? I mean, what is he saying?
Megyn, I'm going to see if I can get this right. We're being told is conservatives have absolutely no power. Our AR-15s, they don't mean anything. There is no way to oppose the government. You would need a squadron of F-15s if you wanted to even have a fighting chance against the government. You'd still certainly lose, by the way. Also, a band of unarmed people, one of whom was wearing a horn hat, almost overthrew the Republic on January 6th. So I don't quite, did the horn hat guy have an F-15? I don't, hold on. I was told that you need a squadron of fighter jets, and yet I was also told we have to take away the AR-15, the most popular rifle in America, because it's a weapon of war. So which is it? I'm not sure. Furthermore, I was told that the American people, if the government ever, God forbid, turn so tyrannical that they're, strafing the middle of the country, dropping bombs on Oklahoma or something, that we would have no way to defend ourselves. And yet, I seem to recall that a band of basically illiterate goat herders with black powder rifle guns in Afghanistan successfully fended off the United States for about 20 years. Afghanistan is the size of Texas. So please forgive me if I'm a little skeptical of some of Joe Biden's claims. He's speaking from a point of desperation, which is that desperate regimes always try to disarm the citizens. And they don't disarm the citizens because the arms aren't significant. They disarm the citizens because they know that an armed populace is going to be much, much harder to put the foot on the back of their necks.
Yeah, again, well said. Then he made yet another racist comment. I mean, it's like if the media would actually keep track of Joe Biden's racist comments, they would see like he dwarfs Trump. Trump made some comment at a rally where like, my black American, like that, which they blew up into a front page story for days, right? For days. And Biden gets a pass on all of it. You ain't black if you don't vote Democrat, all the stuff that he has said over the years. I mean, we could go down the list. And the latest was about how you know where to find the best basketball in the state, if you know what I'm saying. Listen here.
If I can just interject for a moment, my deceased son, Bo, he was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. And what he used to do is go down on the east side, what called the Bucket, highest crime rate in the country. There's a place where I was the only white guy that worked as a lifeguard down in that area, on the east side. And you can always tell where the best basketball in the state is and the best basketball in the city is. It's where everybody shows up.
Oh boy. And just as a refresher, here are a couple of others. You cannot go into a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking. Obama, when you hear this quote again, it's stunning. He became the guy's vice president. Obama is the first mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice looking guy. What the F? He said that. Poor kids are just as bright and talented as white kids. Oh my God. And now this. So, you got to keep it in context because he's got a long history of these things. Collective yawn by the media. They don't care.
I'm starting to think that Corn Pop was the good guy. I think when Biden was that lifeguard, he didn't tell that story right. Corn Pop, I think, was the good guy. Of course, he gets a pass. It doesn't matter because no one actually cares about racism. Racism has basically lost all of its meaning. All it is a cudgel to attack Republicans. When Joe Biden comes out and he says, these Republicans are all racist, most recently he said, these Republicans, they're fascists. I promise you, I would bet my life savings Joe Biden not only has never read The Doctrine of Fascism by Mussolini, he has never even heard of The Doctrine of Fascism. He has no idea what it means. All fascism means, and George Orwell made this point, today is something that I don't like. All racism means is bad. You're a bad person. And so it doesn't matter. They'll never hold Biden or any of the Democrats to this standard. It has nothing to do with race. Has nothing to do with 20th century Italian political movements. What they're saying is, you Republicans are bad, and we are going to boot you out of the public square.
So yes, President Unity did refer to half the country as semi-fascists. And just in case we didn't fully understand what he meant, his right-hand woman, Karine Jean-Pierre, takes to the White House podium lectern to explain as follows. Listen to how she put it.
The president thinks that there is an extremist threat to our democracy. The president has been clear as he can be on that particular piece when we talk about a democracy, when we talk about our freedoms. The way that he sees is the MAGA Republicans are the most energized part of the Republican Party. This is an extreme threat to our democracy, to our freedom, to our rights. They just don't respect the rule of law. You heard that from the president. They are pursuing an agenda that takes away people's rights. So, which is what the president said last week on Thursday. You all heard him. This is what the president said yesterday, and that's what he's going to continue to say.
She's reading. She prepared that. It came out exactly as she wanted it to. That MAGA Republicans are an extreme threat to our democracy, etc.
That's the key. The key is that this was not a gaffe that she might be prone to, that Joe Biden is certainly prone to. This was written out. This was agreed upon in the White House. She repeated it, and she's calling the Republicans terrorists who pose an existential threat. You'll notice that the left doesn't refer to terrorists as terrorists. They refer to the leader of ISIS as the austere religious scholar. They're really.
It was in the New York Times.
That's right. But the Republicans are the terrorists, and there's such an irony too, because if you call someone an extreme threat to our democracy, you're saying this is their very existence is the threat. It's existential, and so the only implied solution here would be to get rid of half the country. They're saying the only way that we can protect government of the people, by the people, and for the people is to get rid of half the people. And that's incoherent from the standpoint of democracy, but it does start to make sense when you realize, and the Harvard law professor Adrian Vermeule has made this point, when the left refers to democracy, they don't mean democracy. They mean liberalism. They mean leftism. They mean progressivism. That's the only way it makes sense that when the people elect Donald Trump, it's a threat to democracy. When the people elect Bolsonaro in Brazil, they elect Orban in Hungary. It could even be an overwhelming majority of people who elect these leaders. But if the leaders are right-wing, then somehow it's a threat to democracy, even if the demos, the people, is the one electing them. Because for the left, democracy means absolutely nothing. It's all just to protect liberalism.
So this really caught my eye because, it's like, whoa, so you're going to have to buy an electric vehicle in California, not immediately, but not in the too distant future either. And slowly but surely, gas guzzlers are not even going to be available in California bit by bit over the next 10 years. What do you make of this policy?
I mean, it's part of the collective madness that's occurring in Western countries, including the United States right now. I mean, as you mentioned, we're in the worst energy crisis that we've been in since the early 70s. It might be much worse than that. Hundreds of millions of people are going to die of hunger this year because of expensive natural gas, because of the war on natural gas, the war on oil and gas, both by President Biden, but also you see in Canada, in Europe. So we're in a very serious crisis right now. There is reason to think that one day we will move to hydrogen fuel cell cars. It's unlikely to be a transition to electric cars, in my view, because they're basically powered with lithium, which relies on rare earths. That entire industry is based in China, and it's insane from a national security perspective to become more dependent on China at this moment in our history. These are also very expensive, very heavy vehicles. Most experts that look at this think that if we're going to move away from gasoline, it's going to be to hydrogen fuel cells. That's been the view for decades. So the idea that you're going to just ban internal combustion engines and move to, a kind of vehicle that depends, that would increase our dependency on China at a moment like this is just bonkers. It's not going to happen. They're going to have to reverse course. But I think it epitomizes the danger, the real danger that we're in with this war on energy, and in particular the war on oil and gas.
So it's not going to be just California either, because at least Virginia has an automatic trigger in its law saying we're going to do whatever California does when it comes to climate change regulations. And they say something like 12 to 16 other states are likely to follow suit. So if you're in a blue state, expect the same in your state if California goes through with this. Which they're saying they're going to. You're saying it's not going to happen because it's impractical, I assume. But they've resolved to do it. The vote happened on Thursday by the California air regulators. They say that this will be the one of the first such bans worldwide, just so the audience knows what we're talking about. They set interim quotas for zero emission vehicles. All right. So starting with the 2026 model cars, 35% of all new cars, SUVs, and small pickups sold in California must be zero emission vehicles. That quota increases each year. It's expected to reach 51% of all new car sales in 2028. That's just 6 years away. And then by 2030, It's supposed to be 68% of all cars have to be zero emission by 2035, 100%. So not to be too dense, but when they say you have to have a zero emission vehicle, that more than half of all new car sales in 2028, 6 years from now, have to be zero emission. Does that mean they have to be totally electric?
Yeah, electric or fuel cell. But look, I think the point of this is that, we didn't get the iPhone by banning flip phones. We didn't get internal combustion vehicles by banning horse and buggies. Innovation occurs. It becomes better and cheaper than the incumbent technology, and we move to it through market forces. Governments can help with R&D, but this thing of kind of bans on technologies that are at this moment in time superior to the technologies that they want, it's just madness. I mean, I think we're at a moment of peak climate hysteria, of peak climate nihilism, where basically the concerns around climate change, some of which I hold, by the way, I think climate change is real and we should do something about, but it's just created a kind of derangement syndrome among many people on the left, where they think that somehow you just get technologies by banning this or that technology and wishing a new technology to exist in its place. It doesn't work like that. These are, we have technologies that are based on decades of development. Electric cars, they're a long ways off still. There's a lot of problems with them, as I mentioned, particularly the heavy reliance on rare earths, the heavy reliance on Chinese materials. There's a lot of talk about returning those industries to the United States. That hasn't happened, and it's unlikely to happen within the next decade, if ever, for some of the reasons I mentioned. There are good reasons to think that we'll move to hydrogen over time, but we're talking about a decades-long process. Energy transitions, like the transition from coal to oil and gas, or the transition from wood to coal before that, and the transition from what I think will eventually occur from natural gas to nuclear, these things take decades and centuries. You can't just go and make them happen in a few years. It's just politicians gone wild in California, and it's really the case all around the world. It's a kind of mania that we're experiencing right now. I think we're about to have a really abrupt wake-up call this winter when we see just how deadly many of these policies have become.
I want to get to that, but table it for right now because I want to stay on batteries for a second. So there's at least a couple of problems. One is supporting China. According to my stats, current electric vehicles depend on lithium for their batteries, which store and use energy produced elsewhere. Most lithium is produced overseas, chiefly in Australia, Chile, and China. Batteries primarily manufactured in China. The U.S. has one lithium processing facility, and it's not even among the world's top 10 lithium producing nations. So we're not going to be making these batteries. We got to get them from places like China. So we've got a problem in terms of greater dependence on China for the batteries of these cars. And we've got a problem of, you've mentioned this on the show before, the charging stations. Because anybody who's got an iPhone knows if you have something that's, electronic, you've got to charge it at one point or another. And the same is true for the batteries inside of these cars. And does California have the infrastructure to charge, I don't know how many people are in the state of California, to charge all of their electric vehicles by, 10 years from now?
No, it does not. Absolutely does not. The materials component, just one more thing on that. It's a huge issue. It's not just lithium. It's also nickel. It's also rare earths. We know that the mining of these rare earths is incredibly destructive. The Associated Press just came out with a major report about how devastating rare earth mining. These are these very, they're actually common minerals, but they're at low levels in the earth. And so you have to dig up a lot of earth to get a small amount of these pure elements. But devastating impact on the rainforests of Burma, of Myanmar. We also know that they're all processed in China. In the refining process itself is incredibly energy intensive, incredibly dirty. It's very unlikely to see these industries coming back to the United States, given our very high environmental standards. So there's just a huge minerals component of this that is being underestimated. Yes, the charging stations is, of course, a huge obstacle. There's no universal agreement on what the kind of charging system should be. There's been some conflicts between the electric automakers around what that standard should be. And then there's many other issues. Another issue is that fast charging has been promoted as a way to really quickly refuel the electric cars with electricity. But that itself actually puts a heavy toll on their batteries. It makes the batteries run out much faster than in a normal refueling. So, those are some of the problems. Another problem, of course, is that you're having multiple energy conversions. Just to get a little wonky here, what you want is every time you convert energy, either from chemicals into electricity or from a fuel like coal or natural gas into heat and then into electricity, you're paying a penalty that has an economic cost. And so you want to reduce the number of energy conversions. With a hydrogen fuel cell, you only have one conversion, which is from natural gas to hydrogen. Eventually in the future, it would be from water to hydrogen. But with the electric vehicles, you're having at least one or two more energy conversions, which makes the cost of it that much higher. So yeah, I guess the bottom line, because there's a lot of complexity here, but the bottom line is that these are technologies that are simply not ready. They're very expensive. They require an increased dependence on China at a time where we really don't want to become more dependent on China.
We reached out to Kyle for his response to your op-ed in Newsweek and to what we anticipated would be your appearance here today. And it was sort of an interesting series of events. His spokesperson, David Hancock, responded first. And then in came a lengthier statement from David Hancock. And then in came a statement from Kyle himself. So I kind of have sort of three responses to go over with you. First came this from David Hancock, one paragraph only. Kyle wishes Richie the best as he tries to reinvent himself and will always be thankful that Richie was honest and sincere when it mattered the most, not just for Kyle, but for America. Okay, so that was number one. David has since added a second paragraph to that. That reads, Kyle thought waiting until the 2-year anniversary of Kenosha to pander to the left with selective storytelling was painfully transparent. But pretending the thugs who attacked him were now victims was hypocritical and unprincipled. So that's him to you. He's referring to your behavior. Kyle, this is from him directly, writes as follows, quote, unfortunately, Richie's latest story leaves a lot of important details out, including my intentions to help others while I was there, or the fact that I was chased down and assaulted by an armed mob. I am grateful he told the truth when it mattered. His new story doesn't change the facts of that day. I am forever grateful for the justice system for seeing my innocence in all of this. So what do you make of it? You've left out a lot of details, including his intentions. Grateful you told the truth when it mattered. You now have a new story that they think is hypocritical, unprincipled, and painfully transparent as you attempt to, quote, pander to the left.
Well, see, that's what I was talking about earlier, which is if you step outside of, that trench, then you're going to basically be cast into the other one. And so when I was during the trial, people were calling me a right-wing conservative. And now people are saying that I'm pandering to the left with this new piece. I mean, I think that Kyle, that response, I think that that's a very fair contention. I did include details of why he stated that he was there. He stated, he wasn't an actual medic though. So he was there to help people who were injured, but he wasn't an actual trained medic. He had lifeguard certification. So I'm just as much a medic as he is, having been a surf instructor. Secondarily, I use the word playing cop for a reason. And it's because what I picked up on the moment that I was walking through the streets with him is that he was playing the role of both cop, medic, later on when he had the fire extinguisher, also fireman, but it was like he was playing a role. It wasn't like he was actually really knew what he was doing in that situation. And so my piece is, the intention is to show my personal perspective and going from witness to human being. And so, I didn't intend this as a hit piece to Kyle in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, it's I believe more excoriating of the media than anybody else. But that's what everybody focused on. And I wish the best for Kyle. I know that he suffered a lot of trauma as a result of what happened. And I didn't mean to add on to that. But with that being said, I did have to take the opportunity to state my human perspective of the events that night, because I believe that, down the road, it's an important perspective. And I was right there. And what people got from me prior to that piece was me trying my best to play the role of witness. So if people don't like, what my opinion is, that's fine. This is America. I mean, I really appreciate the fact that we're even able to have, like, the fact that we're on this show right now and we're talking about this at such great length, and that we actually even got a response from Kyle, and I'm now interacting with that. That's exactly what I want to come out of all of what happened in 2020, which is a reckoning on the media, where people realize that the corporate institutions that drive our discourse are driving us apart. And you know what? If Kyle wants to have a beer or sit down on a podcast and talk about it, I'm willing to talk to anybody. I'm not saying like,
no, he's welcome to do that right here. He's never been on this show, though we invited him.
Yeah. I have no problem with that, because he is a human being and he was affected just like I was. And so me providing my perspective, that word victim, it was not used in the legal sense. I was not stating that he was criminally liable for anything. They're dead and he's not. And there was a series of decisions that went into that.
I know, but like, and I'll just challenge you on that. But the reason they're dead and he's not is there. That's what I was going at earlier. Nobody made Rosenbaum show up at that thing, at that protest. Nobody made him run after Kyle. Nobody made him lunge for a gun he could clearly see was there and dangerous. I see this and I say it's unfortunate he made those decisions, but that's on him. That is on him. So that's what people are reacting. And then you find out his background, and you really, like most of us, not those who held him while he was dying, think, I'm done. I'm kind of out of sympathy for Joseph Rosenbaum.
Yes, absolutely. Look, that's totally fine. And I absolutely understand that opinion. And I understand why people have that opinion. But like I said, I can't unpack the lived experience of that, and I didn't know those details at the time. And
what about this though, Richie? What about this? Because they said people are hating you because when you went back to Kenosha, you said I tried to retrace my steps. There was no memorial for Rosenbaum or Huber. Huber's the other guy who was killed. So and people are like, what? What is he saying? Those were bad guys who attacked a 17-year-old.
Well, the point of providing that detail was actually to mirror the lionization that happened with Rosenbaum initially, and then how after the case, they forgot about him. And so like there's still if you go to where George Floyd died, there's a massive memorial that's still there, right? And I'm not saying there wasn't a judgment on their behavior. It was a judgment on the way in which the city is moving forward. And so the fact that there was no memorial for them, I also said in the next sentence that there was no plaque for the riots and the violence. Like, so
are you saying that they were fake news when they tried to act like they were all concerned about Huber and Rosenbaum, that was BS?
Exactly. And so it's funny because that detail was actually what I was trying to get at, is the fact that the left used him opportunistically, used Rosenbaum and Huber 100%. Opportunistically as heroes, and then kind of just cast him to the wayside. And the city itself wants to forget about what happened.